In the annals of American military history, few figures are as polarizing as Braxton Bragg. Born into the tumultuous antebellum South, Bragg's life would become intertwined with the fate of a fledgling nation. He was a man of contradictions, a brilliant military strategist prone to debilitating self-doubt. His name evokes both admiration for his tactical genius and frustration for his perceived shortcomings. Bragg's story is not simply a dry recitation of battles and campaigns. It's a deeply human tale filled with ambition, rivalry, and the heavy weight of responsibility. It's a story of a man grappling with the complexities of loyalty, duty, and the ever-shifting tides of war. This is the story of Braxton Bragg, a man who, despite his flaws and controversies, left an indelible mark on the course of the Civil War. From the battlefields of Mexico to the blood-soaked fields of Shiloh and Chickamauga, Bragg's journey offers a glimpse into the soul of a conflicted nation. His life was a tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and blunder, victory and defeat. To understand Braxton Bragg is to understand the complexities of the American Civil War itself. The Bragg family name echoed with the legacy of the newly formed nation. Braxton's father, Thomas Bragg, embodied the spirit of ambition and resilience that characterized the burgeoning American South. A veteran of the War of 1812, Thomas had fought under the banner of Andrew Jackson, the fiery general who would later become president. Those years of service had left an indelible mark on Thomas Bragg, instilling in him a profound sense of duty and an unyielding belief in the principles of self-reliance and honor. Returning from the war, he sought to build a life for himself and his family in the fertile lands of North Carolina. Through hard work and shrewd business acumen, Thomas Bragg transformed himself into a successful planter. He acquired vast tracts of land and cultivated them with the labor of enslaved Africans, a practice that, while morally reprehensible by modern standards, was tragically commonplace in the antebellum South. The Bragg plantation became a testament to Thomas's ambition, a symbol of prosperity carved out of the Carolina soil. It was here, amidst the sprawling fields and grand manor house, that Braxton Bragg would spend his formative years, shaped by the values and aspirations of his father's generation. Braxton Bragg, the fifth of 8 children born to Thomas and Margaret Bragg, entered this world on March 22, 1817. His arrival was met with a mixture of joy and anticipation, as befitting the son of a prominent planter. From the outset, it was clear that Braxton was a serious and introspective child. While his siblings delighted in the carefree pursuits of youth, Braxton often sought solitude, preferring the company of books to the boisterous games of his peers. He possessed an air of quiet intensity, a penetrating gaze that seemed to betray a mind constantly at work. This seriousness of temperament did not escape the notice of Thomas Bragg. A stern and demanding patriarch, Thomas saw in his son a reflection of his own ambition, a potential heir to carry the family name to even greater heights. He instilled in young Braxton the importance of duty, honor, and unwavering perseverance. Thomas Bragg harbored grand aspirations for his children, and he spared no expense in providing them with the best education available. He believed that knowledge, particularly knowledge of history and military strategy, was the key to success in the rapidly changing world of the American South. Braxton's early education was entrusted to private tutors, men of learning carefully selected by Thomas Bragg to nurture his son's burgeoning intellect. They schooled him in the classics, drilling him in Latin and Greek, history and mathematics. Braxton, with his thirst for knowledge and his natural aptitude for academic pursuits, proved to be an exemplary student. He devoured books on history and military strategy, fascinated by tales of great battles and the exploits of military commanders throughout the ages. His tutors, recognizing his keen mind and disciplined work ethic, encouraged his intellectual pursuits. They saw in him a young man destined for greatness, someone who possessed the potential to make his mark on the world. However, while Braxton excelled in his studies, his social development lagged behind. His introverted nature and quick temper often led to clashes with his siblings and peers. He struggled to form close bonds, preferring the world of ideas and knowledge to the complexities of human interaction. As Braxton grew older, his father enrolled him in a series of prestigious academies, seeking to provide him with the best possible education. These institutions, catering to the sons of wealthy planters and merchants, emphasized classical learning and instilled in their students a deep sense of Southern pride and tradition. It was within the hallowed halls of these academies that Braxton Bragg began to hone the skills that would later define his military career. He excelled in mathematics and engineering, demonstrating a natural aptitude for strategy and problem solving. Beyond the classroom, Braxton was drawn to military drills and exercises. He studied military history with an intensity that bordered on obsession, immersing himself in the campaigns of Caesar, Napoleon, and other legendary commanders. The military, with its emphasis on discipline, order, and hierarchy, held a particular allure for the young Braxton. It offered a structured environment where intelligence and strategic thinking were valued, a world where he could excel based on merit rather than social graces. The year was 1833, and the young nation of America was still finding its footing on the world stage. For a young man of ambition and drive like Braxton Bragg, the allure of a military career held a powerful sway. It promised adventure, challenge, and the opportunity to serve one's country. Thomas Bragg, ever mindful of the legacy he sought to impart to his children, recognized his son's burgeoning interest in military life. He used his influence to secure Braxton an appointment to the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. Founded in 1802, West Point was the nation's premier military academy, a crucible where young men were forged into soldiers and leaders. Its rigorous curriculum, demanding physical training, and emphasis on discipline and honor had produced generations of officers who had shaped the destiny of the young republic. For Braxton Bragg, leaving the familiar comforts of his Southern upbringing to embark on this new chapter was a pivotal moment. It marked the beginning of his transformation from a studious, if somewhat introverted youth, into a soldier, tested and tempered in the fires of military discipline. Life at West Point was a far cry from the genteel world of Southern plantation society. The Academy's strict code of conduct, demanding academic workload, and relentless physical training pushed cadets to their limits, separating the wheat from the chaff. Braxton Bragg, with his serious demeanor and unwavering work ethic, took to the challenges of West Point with characteristic determination. He excelled in his studies, particularly in mathematics, engineering, and artillery, subjects that played to his analytical mind and eye for detail. While some cadets chafed under the strict discipline, Bragg seemed to thrive in the structured environment. He embraced the military ethos, internalizing its emphasis on order, hierarchy, and unwavering obedience to authority. His natural intelligence and strategic thinking quickly marked him as a standout among his peers. Yet even as he excelled academically and mastered the intricacies of military drill, Bragg's personality remained a point of contention. His sharp tongue, quick temper, and tendency towards aloofness alienated some of his classmates, earning him a reputation for being difficult and unapproachable. In 1837, Braxton Bragg graduated fifth in his class at West Point, a testament to his intellect and unwavering dedication. He received his commission as a second lieutenant in the 3rd U.S. Artillery, a prestigious assignment that reflected his academic achievements. Bragg's first taste of active duty came amidst the sweltering heat and dense swamps of Florida. The Second Seminole War, a brutal and protracted conflict between the U.S. Army and the Seminole Indians, had been raging for years, testing the mettle of even the most seasoned soldiers. For Bragg, fresh out of West Point, the Florida campaign was a baptism by fire. The brutal realities of warfare, the constant threat of ambush, and the challenges of fighting in a hostile and unforgiving terrain were a far cry from the parade ground drills of the academy. Yet, Bragg faced these challenges with the same determination and unwavering sense of duty that had marked his time at West Point. The Second Seminole War, though often overshadowed by other conflicts in American history, proved to be a crucial proving ground for the young Braxton Bragg. It was in the swamps and forests of Florida that he learned to apply the theoretical knowledge he had acquired at West Point to the unpredictable realities of combat. Bragg's responsibilities extended beyond simply commanding artillery pieces. He was tasked with leading men, often in dangerous and chaotic situations. The war tested not only his physical courage, but also his ability to inspire and motivate those under his command. It was during this period that Bragg's demanding leadership style, which would later become a defining characteristic, began to emerge. He held himself and those under his command to the highest standards, expecting nothing less than unwavering obedience and peak performance. While this approach earned him the respect of some, it also sowed the seeds of discontent among others who chafed under his strict discipline and perceived lack of empathy. The Florida campaign, while forging Bragg into a capable officer, also revealed the cracks in his personality that would later hinder his rise to military greatness. By the mid-1840s, a palpable tension gripped the United States. The issue of slavery, long a festering wound on the nation's conscience, threatened to tear the young republic apart. Bragg, having distinguished himself in the Second Seminole War, found himself stationed at various posts along the nation's expanding frontier. He served with distinction, earning a reputation as a meticulous officer and a strict disciplinarian. However, the growing sectional tensions were impossible to ignore. As a Southerner by birth and upbringing, Bragg felt the pull of loyalty to his home state and the way of life it represented. Yet, he was also a career military officer sworn to uphold the Constitution and defend the Union. The Mexican-American War, which erupted in 1846, presented Bragg with a complex dilemma. The war, sparked by territorial disputes and fueled by expansionist ambitions, further inflamed the debate over slavery. Many in the South saw it as an opportunity to expand the institution of slavery into new territories, while abolitionists in the North condemned it as a blatant power grab. Despite the moral complexities surrounding the Mexican-American War, Braxton Bragg answered his nation's call to duty with his characteristic sense of purpose. He was assigned to the army of General Zachary Taylor, a gruff but effective commander known as Old Rough and Ready. The war provided Bragg with the opportunity to demonstrate his tactical brilliance on a larger stage. He played a key role in the siege of Fort Texas, where his artillery bombardments helped to soften the Mexican defenses. At the Battle of Monterey, Bragg's artillery prowess proved instrumental in securing an American victory. His strategic placement of guns and his ability to direct accurate and devastating fire earned him the respect of his superiors and the grudging admiration of his enemies. Bragg's performance at Monterey earned him a brevet promotion to major, a recognition of his courage and tactical acumen. He had proven himself to be a skilled artillery officer, capable of directing fire with precision and devastating effect. As the Mexican-American War raged on, Braxton Bragg continued to distinguish himself. He participated in the Battle of Buena Vista, a pivotal engagement that cemented American control over northern Mexico. During the battle, Bragg's artillery played a crucial role in repelling a series of determined Mexican attacks. His guns, strategically positioned and expertly manned, inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy, helping to turn the tide of battle in favor of the Americans. Bragg's actions at Buena Vista earned him widespread acclaim. He received another brevet promotion, this time to lieutenant colonel, and was hailed as a hero for his bravery and tactical brilliance. The war, for all its moral complexities, had transformed Bragg into a seasoned and decorated officer, his reputation cemented in the annals of American military history. However, the war also took its toll on Bragg. He witnessed firsthand the horrors of combat, the carnage and suffering inflicted on both sides. The experience left an indelible mark on his psyche, hardening his resolve and deepening his sense of fatalism. Following the Mexican-American War, Braxton Bragg returned to a nation increasingly divided against itself. The issue of slavery, temporarily pushed aside during the conflict, re-emerged with a vengeance, fueling sectional tensions that threatened to erupt into open warfare. Bragg, despite his military successes, was not immune to the pull of his Southern heritage. He had witnessed firsthand the growing abolitionist sentiment in the North, and he felt a sense of unease about the future of his beloved South within the Union. He resigned from the U.S. Army in 1856, choosing to retire to civilian life as a sugar planter in Louisiana. He seemed destined for a life of quiet prosperity, far from the battlefields that had defined his early career. However, fate, it seemed, had other plans for Braxton Bragg. The storm clouds of secession were gathering, and he, along with millions of other Southerners, would soon be caught in the maelstrom of a conflict that would test the very soul of a nation. The year 1861 dawned with a sense of foreboding across the nation. The long-simmering tensions between North and South, fueled by the intractable issue of slavery, finally boiled over. When Fort Sumter fell to Confederate forces in April of that year, the nation was plunged headlong into a bloody civil war. For Braxton Bragg, retired from the U.S. Army and seemingly settled into civilian life, the call to arms proved irresistible. His loyalty to his native South, coupled with his deep-seated belief in the principles of states' rights, compelled him to offer his services to the newly formed Confederacy. Bragg's military experience and reputation as a strict disciplinarian quickly caught the attention of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. He was commissioned as a brigadier general in the Confederate Army and given command of forces in Pensacola, Florida, a strategically important port city. Although eager to prove himself in defense of the Confederacy, Bragg's initial assignments were largely administrative. He oversaw the training and organization of troops, preparing them for the inevitable clash with Union forces. However, Bragg yearned for a more active role in the conflict, a chance to test his mettle against the enemy on the battlefield. Bragg's opportunity for battlefield glory came in the spring of 1862 at the Battle of Shiloh, a brutal two-day engagement fought in southwestern Tennessee. The battle, one of the bloodiest of the war, would prove to be a pivotal moment in Bragg's military career, testing his courage and tactical acumen under the most demanding of circumstances. Serving under General Albert Sidney Johnston, Bragg commanded a corps of Confederate troops tasked with driving back the Union Army under General Ulysses S. Grant. The fighting at Shiloh was fierce and unrelenting, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Bragg, known for his coolness under fire and his meticulous attention to detail, directed his troops with skill and determination. His artillery bombardments inflicted heavy losses on the Union lines, and his infantry assaults, though costly, helped to push back the enemy. Despite the ferocity of the Confederate attack, the first day of battle ended in a stalemate. However, the tide seemed to be turning in favor of the South. Bragg, exhausted but exhilarated by the day's fighting, retired to his tent that night, confident that victory was within reach. The second day of fighting at Shiloh dawned with a renewed sense of urgency for the Confederates. However, the death of General Johnston, mortally wounded the previous day, cast a pall over the Southern ranks. Bragg, now answering to General Beauregard, pressed the attack with his customary vigor. Despite his best efforts, the Confederate advance faltered in the face of stiffening Union resistance. By day's end, the Southern forces were in full retreat, their hopes of a decisive victory dashed. Despite the Confederate defeat at Shiloh, Bragg's performance in the battle did not go unnoticed. He was promoted to full general, becoming one of the youngest men to hold that rank in the Confederate Army. His reputation as a skilled tactician and a courageous leader, forged in the crucible of battle, continued to grow. However, Shiloh also revealed some of Bragg's limitations as a commander. His relentless pursuit of victory, often at the expense of his men's lives, earned him a reputation for being overly aggressive and insensitive to the human cost of war. In the summer of 1862, Bragg was given command of the Army of Tennessee, the Confederacy's main fighting force in the Western Theater. His mission: invade Kentucky, a border state strategically important to both sides, and rally its citizens to the Confederate cause. The Kentucky Campaign, as it came to be known, was fraught with challenges from the outset. Bragg's army, outnumbered and undersupplied, faced a formidable opponent in the Union Army of the Ohio, commanded by the capable General Don Carlos Buell. Despite these obstacles, Bragg initially made significant progress, capturing the strategically important city of Lexington and threatening Louisville. However, his hopes of a popular uprising in support of the Confederacy failed to materialize. The people of Kentucky, torn between their loyalties to North and South, largely remained neutral. As the campaign dragged on, Bragg's logistical problems mounted. His supply lines were stretched thin, and his troops, exhausted and demoralized, began to desert in droves. The Kentucky campaign, conceived with such high hopes, was quickly unraveling. By October 1862, Bragg's Kentucky campaign had ground to a halt. He was forced to abandon his plans for liberating the Bluegrass State and retreat southward into Tennessee. The Union Army, under the command of General William Rosecrans, who had replaced Buell, pursued closely, eager to deliver a decisive blow to the retreating Confederates. The two armies clashed at the Battle of Stones River, fought near Murfreesboro, Tennessee, from December 31, 1862 to January 2, 1863. The battle, fought in the depths of winter, was one of the most brutal of the war, with both sides suffering staggering casualties. Bragg, desperate for a victory to salvage his flagging campaign, launched a series of furious attacks against the Union lines. The fighting raged for 3 days, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. By the time the smoke cleared, the battlefield was littered with thousands of dead and wounded. Stones River ended in a tactical draw, a Pyrrhic victory at best for the Confederacy. Although Bragg had inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy, his own army was shattered, its ranks depleted, and its morale shaken. The aftermath of Stones River brought no respite for Braxton Bragg. His aggressive tactics, while effective in inflicting casualties on the enemy, had also decimated his own army. Moreover, his abrasive personality and tendency to blame his subordinates for setbacks had created a climate of distrust and resentment within the Army of Tennessee. Several of Bragg's top generals, including P.G.T. Beauregard, James Longstreet, and Nathan Bedford Forrest, openly questioned his competence as an army commander. They criticized his strategic vision, his handling of logistics, and his inability to foster a sense of unity within the ranks. These criticisms, whispered in private and sometimes voiced openly, reached the ears of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Davis, though personally fond of Bragg and impressed by his intellect, was increasingly concerned about the growing dissension within the Army of Tennessee. Despite the mounting pressure, Davis hesitated to remove Bragg from command. The Confederacy could ill afford to lose one of its most experienced generals, particularly in the critical Western Theater. However, Davis also recognized that something had to be done to address the situation before it further eroded the Army's effectiveness. In the summer of 1863, Braxton Bragg found himself facing another critical test of his leadership. The Union Army, under the command of General William Rosecrans, had launched a new offensive into Georgia, threatening the strategically important city of Chattanooga. Bragg, determined to redeem himself after the disappointments of the Kentucky campaign and the bloodbath at Stones River, concentrated his forces near Chickamauga Creek, just south of Chattanooga. The stage was set for a major battle that would decide the fate of the Confederacy's hold on the Western Theater. The Battle of Chickamauga, fought on September 19th and 20th, 1863, was one of the largest and bloodiest engagements of the entire Civil War. Bragg's army, reinforced by troops under General James Longstreet, launched a series of furious assaults against the Union lines. After 2 days of desperate fighting, the Confederates achieved a costly victory, routing Rosecrans's army and driving it back to Chattanooga. However, Bragg's triumph at Chickamauga was marred by his failure to pursue the retreating enemy aggressively, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Bragg's victory at Chickamauga, while strategically significant, did little to quell the dissent within the ranks of the Army of Tennessee. In fact, his failure to exploit the victory and capture Chattanooga, a key objective, only served to intensify the criticism directed at him. Several of Bragg's top generals, including Longstreet, openly accused him of squandering a golden opportunity to deliver a decisive blow to the Union Army. They argued that Bragg's hesitancy and his penchant for micromanaging his subordinates had snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. The infighting within the Confederate High Command reached a fever pitch in the weeks following Chickamauga. Bragg, increasingly isolated and paranoid, responded to his critics with a series of recriminations and reassignments, further dividing the army and undermining its morale. Word of the disarray within Bragg's army reached the ears of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, who was already grappling with setbacks on other fronts. Davis, deeply concerned by the reports he was receiving, decided to travel to Chattanooga personally to assess the situation. Jefferson Davis's arrival in Chattanooga in early October 1863 did little to alleviate the tensions within the Confederate High Command. If anything, his presence only served to exacerbate the situation, as Bragg and his critics jockeyed for the president's support. Davis, after listening to both sides, made the fateful decision to retain Bragg in command, a decision based more on personal loyalty than on sound military judgment. This decision would have disastrous consequences for the Confederacy. The Union Army, under the command of the newly appointed General Ulysses S. Grant, had used the respite provided by Bragg's inaction to reinforce its positions around Chattanooga. In late November 1863, Grant launched a series of coordinated attacks that shattered the Confederate defenses. The Battle of Chattanooga, a resounding Union victory, marked a turning point in the war in the West. Bragg's army was routed, its remnants fleeing southward into Georgia. The Confederacy would never again seriously threaten Union control of Tennessee. The debacle at Chattanooga proved to be the final straw for Braxton Bragg. His military career, marked by early promise and flashes of brilliance, had ultimately foundered on the shoals of his own flawed personality. His abrasive leadership style, his inability to foster unity within his ranks, and his tendency to blame others for his own shortcomings had alienated his subordinates, undermined his authority, and ultimately contributed to a string of costly defeats. On December 2, 1863, recognizing that his position had become untenable, Braxton Bragg tendered his resignation as commander of the Army of Tennessee. Although deeply disappointed by his relief from command, Bragg remained convinced that he had served the Confederacy to the best of his ability. His departure, however, was met with a collective sigh of relief from many within the Army of Tennessee. The Confederacy, already reeling from a series of defeats, had lost one of its most experienced generals. However, for the battered and demoralized Army of Tennessee, Bragg's departure offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild and perhaps, under new leadership, to regain its lost glory. After his removal from command of the Army of Tennessee, Braxton Bragg found himself adrift in uncertainty. The debacle at Chattanooga left him shattered. Yet Jefferson Davis valued Bragg's loyalty and strategic mind. In February 1864, Bragg was summoned to Richmond to serve as Davis's military advisor. He utilized his analytical skills and military knowledge. Bragg privately yearned for a return to field command. Bragg's keen eye for detail, honed over years of military service, quickly identified critical weaknesses within the Confederate War Department. He found the department plagued by inefficiency, hampered by a lack of coordination, and plagued by shortages of vital supplies. His reports to President Davis were blunt and uncompromising. He criticized the department's procurement practices, its haphazard deployment of troops, and its failure to adequately address the growing logistical challenges facing the Confederacy. Bragg's criticisms, though rooted in his desire to improve the Confederacy's war effort, did little to endear him to the entrenched bureaucracy of the War Department. His blunt assessments and his reputation for being a demanding taskmaster ruffled feathers and fostered resentment among those accustomed to a more leisurely pace of work. Yet, Bragg pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and a growing realization that the Confederacy's back was against the wall. He understood that the South's dwindling resources and manpower had to be utilized with maximum efficiency if they were to have any hope of prevailing against the increasingly powerful Union war machine. Undeterred by the resistance he encountered, Bragg set about trying to implement much-needed reforms within the War Department. He streamlined supply lines, improved communication between various departments, and implemented stricter accountability measures for the distribution of vital resources. He recognized that the Confederacy could no longer afford to fight a war of attrition on multiple fronts. He advocated for a more concentrated defense, focusing on protecting key strategic points and preserving the South's dwindling manpower. While Bragg's efforts did result in some improvements, the Confederacy's strategic situation continued to deteriorate. The Union blockade was tightening its grip, strangling the Southern economy and depriving the Confederate armies of essential supplies. Moreover, the Union Army, now under the overall command of Ulysses S. Grant, was on the move. Grant's strategy of relentless pressure and coordinated offensives on multiple fronts stretched the Confederate defenses to the breaking point. In late 1864, with the Confederacy facing imminent collapse, Braxton Bragg was given one last chance to prove himself on the battlefield. He was assigned to command Confederate forces in the Carolinas, tasked with stopping the advance of General William T. Sherman's Union Army, which was cutting a swath of destruction through the heart of the Confederacy. For Bragg, this new assignment was a bittersweet opportunity. He was back in command, his reputation at stake, but he faced overwhelming odds against a determined and well-supplied enemy. The task before him seemed insurmountable. Sherman's march through Georgia, culminating in the fall of Atlanta, had demoralized the South and exposed the fragility of the Confederacy's defenses. Now, Sherman's sights were set on the Carolinas, aiming to crush the last vestiges of Southern resistance. Bragg, despite his reservations and the knowledge that defeat was almost inevitable, threw himself into the task at hand with his characteristic determination. He rallied his troops, strengthened fortifications, and prepared for the coming storm. Sherman's advance through the Carolinas was a relentless juggernaut, his veteran troops brushing aside the outnumbered and outgunned Confederate forces that stood in their path. Bragg, facing an enemy that seemed to materialize from the very earth, could do little to halt the Union tide. The Battle of Bentonville, fought in March 1865, was the largest battle of the Carolinas campaign and one of the last major engagements of the Civil War. Bragg, commanding a hastily assembled force of Confederate troops, attempted to block Sherman's path, but his efforts proved futile. Despite the bravery displayed by his troops, Bragg's army was outmaneuvered and outfought. The Confederate defeat at Bentonville sealed the fate of the Carolinas and served as a grim prelude to the Confederacy's final collapse. For Bragg, Bentonville was a bitter pill to swallow. It was a defeat that underscored the futility of the Confederacy's situation and highlighted the disparity in resources and manpower between the two sides. The fall of Wilmington, North Carolina in February 1865 was a crushing blow to the Confederacy's already dwindling hopes. The port city, one of the last remaining lifelines for the beleaguered South, had served as a vital conduit for blockade runners bringing in desperately needed supplies. Union forces, spearheaded by a combined naval and land assault, overwhelmed the Confederate defenses at Wilmington, capturing the city and effectively closing the Confederacy's last major port. The loss of Wilmington further constricted the South's supply lines and hastened the Confederacy's demise. For Braxton Bragg, stationed nearby and tasked with coordinating the city's defense, the fall of Wilmington was a personal and strategic disaster. It was a stark reminder of the Confederacy's increasingly desperate situation and the futility of continuing the fight. The news of Wilmington's capture sent shockwaves through the South, extinguishing any lingering hopes of a Confederate victory. The end, it seemed, was near. As the Confederacy crumbled around him, Braxton Bragg found himself swept along in the maelstrom of its final days. He witnessed firsthand the disintegration of armies, the collapse of morale, and the desperate flight of civilians fleeing the advancing Union forces. After the fall of Wilmington, Bragg briefly served as commander of a small force defending Southern railroads, a task as thankless as it was futile. With each passing day, the Confederacy's situation grew more desperate, its armies shattered, and its government on the run. In April 1865, with Richmond under siege and Confederate President Jefferson Davis fleeing southward, Bragg received orders to disband his remaining troops. The order, though not unexpected, marked the official end of his military career and the collapse of the cause for which he had fought and bled. Bragg, along with countless other Southerners, was left to grapple with the enormity of defeat and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The collapse of the Confederacy left Braxton Bragg, like countless others, adrift in uncertainty. The cause for which he had devoted his life lay in ruins. The weight of defeat pressed heavily upon him. Gone was the structure of military life and camaraderie. He was no longer General Bragg, just a defeated soldier. The South he returned to was a shadow of its former self. Cities lay in ruins, economies shattered. The institution of slavery had been swept away. Bragg found the chaos and uncertainty deeply unsettling. Seeking a respite from the turmoil of the post-war South, Bragg and his wife Eliza journeyed westward, eventually settling in Texas. The Lone Star State, though itself bearing the scars of war and the sting of defeat, offered a degree of anonymity and a fresh start for the former Confederate general. Texas, with its vast open spaces and its frontier spirit, held a certain appeal for Bragg. It was a land where men were judged by their grit and determination, not by the color of their uniforms or the outcome of lost battles. Life in Texas was a far cry from the genteel world of Bragg's antebellum upbringing or the rigid hierarchy of the Confederate Army. He worked as a surveyor, a railroad inspector, and even tried his hand at farming, embracing the challenges of manual labor with the same tenacity he had once brought to the battlefield. Life in exile was not without its hardships. The Braggs, accustomed to a life of relative privilege, struggled financially. They lived modestly, relying on Bragg's meager earnings and the kindness of fellow Southerners who had also sought refuge in Texas. Despite the challenges he faced, Braxton Bragg refused to succumb to despair. He believed his skills could still be of service in rebuilding the South. In 1869, Bragg became superintendent of the New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad. He oversaw the repair and expansion of rail lines, vital for the region's economy. Bragg's ventures met with mixed success, but showed his determination to rebuild. Braxton Bragg's efforts to rebuild his life and find a new purpose were inevitably overshadowed by the lingering controversies of his Confederate service. Accusations of wartime cruelty, of being overly aggressive in battle at the expense of his men's lives, followed him like a specter. His critics, both within and outside of the military, pointed to the high casualty rates suffered by the armies under his command. They accused him of being more concerned with maneuver and strategy than with the welfare of his soldiers. Bragg vehemently denied these accusations, arguing that he had always acted in the best interests of his men and the Confederacy. He attributed the high casualties to the ferocity of the fighting and the superior resources of the Union Army. However, the damage to his reputation was done. The image of Bragg as a cold and uncaring commander, more concerned with personal glory than with the lives of his men, persisted in the annals of Civil War history. As the years passed, Braxton Bragg gradually faded from public view. The wounds of the Civil War, both physical and emotional, took their toll. He suffered from recurring health problems, his once robust constitution weakened by the strains of war and the hardships of his post-war life. His beloved wife, Eliza, a constant source of strength and support throughout their long marriage, passed away in 1875, leaving Bragg heartbroken and increasingly isolated. He found solace in the company of his surviving children and grandchildren, but the shadows of the past continued to linger. In his final years, Bragg devoted much of his time to writing his memoirs, hoping to set the record straight about his wartime service and defend his legacy. However, his memoirs, though meticulously researched and passionately argued, failed to sway public opinion. Bragg remained a controversial figure, his name forever linked to the Confederacy's defeats and internal divisions. His military talents, once widely acknowledged, were often overshadowed by his perceived flaws as a leader. Braxton Bragg died on September 27, 1876 in Galveston, Texas. He was laid to rest in Magnolia Cemetery in Mobile, Alabama. Bragg's legacy remains a subject of debate and controversy. He was a brilliant military strategist and a courageous soldier. However, he was also a deeply flawed leader, prone to self-doubt. His military career ended in a string of costly defeats. Braxton Bragg's story serves as a cautionary tale. Braxton Bragg's journey from a North Carolina plantation to the battlefields of the Civil War was a testament to the turbulent times in which he lived. Born into a nation grappling with its identity, he rose through the ranks of a military destined to be torn asunder. His life, like the nation itself, was forged in the fires of conflict and division. From the halls of West Point to the blood-soaked fields of Shiloh and Chickamauga, Bragg demonstrated a keen intellect and an unwavering commitment to duty. He possessed a brilliant military mind capable of devising complex strategies and directing troops with precision. Yet his successes were often overshadowed by his flaws, by the tempestuous personality that alienated allies and undermined his own commands. Bragg's story is not one of simple heroism or villainy. It is a story of human complexity, of a man grappling with the weight of responsibility, the sting of defeat, and the enduring shadows of a lost cause. He was, in many ways, a tragic figure, his talents undermined by his own demons, his legacy forever tarnished by the controversies that dogged his career. Braxton Bragg remains a figure of fascination and debate. Historians continue to dissect his campaigns and scrutinize his decisions. Was he a brilliant strategist or a stubborn commander? The answer is rarely clear-cut. Bragg's legacy is a tapestry of brilliance and blunder. To understand Bragg is to confront the complexities of the Civil War. His story reminds us that history is not just names and dates. Bragg's life offers lessons about leadership and the human spirit.